At the end of the day, data is really valuable, but it's a lagging indicator. The truth is always in the field.
Today, I'm speaking with Eric Hanson, CMO of Mitel, a global leader in business communications, specializing in cloud-based solutions and collaboration tools for businesses of all sizes.
It's not always about the tools. Sometimes it's about getting down to the basics of just doing A/B testing, if you will, at more of a human level.
You know, a marketer exists within a particular industry, and they get very myopic in the language they're using.
Sometimes your cleverness is too vanilla and doesn't really align to the pain point that a given target customer might have. As CMOs or marketing leaders, I think it's so important to...
Eric Hanson, thanks so much for joining us on Top CMO.
Glad to be here. Really great to meet you, Jackson.
And Eric, you are the CMO, the Chief Marketing Officer at Mitel. Tell us a little bit, for listeners who might not be familiar, what is Mitel?
So Mitel is a business communications solution or company headquartered out of Ottawa, Canada, 50 years of heritage, trailblazer in terms of modernizing communications over the last several decades. One of the first communication systems to be moved into what is now known as cloud communications, but also offers full hybrid solutions from prem to public cloud and everything in between, really supporting modern enterprise organizations around the world in terms of resilient and secure business communications that power their business.
So who are you marketing to at Mitel? Who's the decision maker that you're trying to warm up with your marketing activity?
It's a great question. I think mileage varies certainly by the type of organization and industry. You have a lot of large organizations, really trying to be thoughtful about how they maintain that connective tissue in terms of how people collaborate and communicate within their organizations, as well as with customers. So the people that we are typically marketing to could be everything from the CFO in a case where they're looking to try and optimize and value engineer their cost structures. And obviously communications and how it connects everybody certainly has a role to play in terms of driving efficiency within an organization. It could be the CIO in terms of thinking about how they maintain resiliency and security and control, especially in the dynamics that we live in today, whether it's natural disasters, changing weather, geopolitical situations. How do you keep your people connected in secure ways to maintain your business momentum? And so, really, it's across the spectrum in terms of business leaders and stakeholders in the business that are really driving business outcome.
Now, I imagine that you saw a tremendous amount of growth kind of through the pandemic. That sort of seems like when there was a big focus on this industry. Tell me a little bit about that.
So I think, both heading into the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic, I would say that generally speaking, and first of all, I joined Mitel about 6 months ago. But my background has been in the communication space for probably 15 years. And I would say, going into just before the pandemic, certainly there was already a shift in terms of modernizing the workforce and supporting distributed or remote work, whether that was, kind of a move from a work from home perspective, or whether it was the dynamics of maintaining satellite offices and keeping people sort of centrally connected, right? And there's a lot of industries that sort of pioneered that business practice. And of course, now because of COVID, that has become mainstream. I think coming out of COVID, a lot of the hype around pure public cloud and the accessibility that certainly afforded us during the pandemic has sort of settled. And so now you have a lot of large organizations that are looking at the world and saying, that's really important for me to support certain use cases and certain types of users within my organization. But I also need to complement that with, whether it's private or hosted, more secure cloud solutions that I have more control over. Again, depending upon the business, whether it's manufacturing or in healthcare where you're dealing with, patient records, these things really matter. And so having that sort of hybrid approach where you can mix and match and take the best of all of these different deployment technologies in order to power your business and how you communicate between employees as well as with customers is really what we've seen in terms of that trend and that.
That makes sense. So you've got a space that's kind of really been in flux for a while. You're kind of stepping into a new role as CMO here. I'm curious, as you see it, what are the big marketing challenges that Mitel's facing right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. And and I think it gets to part of why I took this opportunity, as a marketing leader or a business leader. I have a bit of an entrepreneurial spirit. I don't consider myself just a marketer. I've spent time as an enterprise seller. Early in my career, I was in product management during a period of time. And of course, my last several roles have been as the CMO at a couple of different companies. Two of them in the communication space, one of them in the security space. And so for me, I kind of think of myself as more of a business leader and market opportunist, if you will, kind of harkening back to my entrepreneurial spirit. And so, I look at in terms of what we're trying to do at Mitel is a really interesting, sort of problem to be solved or opportunity to be addressed, which is you've got this company that's been around for, 50 years. Again, I mentioned trailblazer in many respects in terms of its heritage and history. But as companies get to be that old, sometimes, there's an opportunity to reimagine who and what the company stands for, right? Along the lines of what IBM has done, HP certainly has done this. Apple during the Think Different days certainly went through this process. And more recently, I think Microsoft. And so for me, one of the opportunities that I believe we have is really to reimagine what this brand is and how that aligns to what's happening in the market to really drive real value for our customers as well as for our business. And so for me, that's one of the big opportunities, challenges, and exciting things that we have the opportunity to do, between me and my team.
So brass tacks, how do you do that? I mean, are you thinking like, hey, maybe it's time for a rebrand? We dust off the logo and we get a new tagline. Like, is this kind of deep market research? I know you're a sales guy. Is this like, Eric's gonna jump on the phone and talk to a bunch of customers and go through the sales process and see where the friction is? Like, how does that tactically look as a new CMO if you're saying, hey, we need to reimagine some things?
I think I had a VP of engineering that I worked with early in my career, and he turned to me one day and he said, at the end of the day, data is really valuable, but it's a lagging indicator. The truth is always in the field. And if you think about whether you're a seller or, I consider myself a recovering product marketer in some respects, it all starts with what's the pain, what's the problem to be solved, and what are the market dynamics, right? And so I think, there's certainly you brought up COVID and, and certainly the momentum around COVID and relative to communications and some of the things that have happened. And so I think for in our particular industry, kind of getting to your question, there's been a lot of hype by some of the relatively newcomers to this industry that are pure public cloud based as a service type vendors, right? And so for them, that's all they have to sell. And so the hype is all around everything's going to go to pure public cloud based solutions. For us, we're thinking more about customer outcomes. We're thinking more about where's the market going in terms of the reality versus the hype, right? And so when I think about it, I start with, of course, talking to customers for sure, because again, the truth is in the field. I look at market data. So for instance, in our particular industry, all the hype has been around things moving to a category within communications called UCaaS, Unified Communications as a Service. And of course, when you look at the growth numbers around UCaaS coming out of COVID, it looks very impressive. But when you look at the actual number of seats sold, it's actually on par with people that are moving from, sort of legacy premise-based solutions to other forms of cloud, private, hosted, more secure forms, right? And so there's an equal number moving to that particular category. For a company like ours that sells all of that, including UCaaS, it's an opportunity to sort of reframe the problem in the market and challenge the narrative that's been created by these newcomers, right? And so for me, it's all about defining the conversation or redefining the conversation in the market. And that's how you disrupt, I believe, the narrative that's happening and how you can then crack the consideration phase, as a marketer, as part of the go-to-market team in any company. And so I'm giving you a specific example relative to the category that we happen to compete in. But as a marketing leader, as a business leader, that's how I think about it. I think about that intersection of what's actually happening at the customer level and the challenges that they're facing and their realities versus the hype that's being created by vendors in the market because it's all they have to sell. And how do you really align to your strengths relative to what those problems are that the customers are facing to help them get to a desired future state that really helps them drive their business?
You're looking at a field where the hype is kind of going one direction. the field is suggesting something different, and you see an opportunity to sell something more robust and more aligned with what people's needs actually are, where do you go to communicate that? Are you looking to like build out white papers? Are you looking to, are you running lots of LinkedIn ads? Is this you got like a big sales team just picking up the phone all day long? How do you tell that story like on the ground?
Well, every marketer knows this, and just as every salesperson and product person knows this, there's no silver bullets, right? All these things have to work together, and so there's a particular thing that I'm pretty passionate about in terms of a go-to-market practice, if you will. Certainly there's been a lot of hype as practitioners in marketing around account-based marketing or ABM over the years, and then that sort of evolved, because there was a lot of research done that said when you tightly align sales and marketing organizations, that productivity and the return on investment is higher, and that became sort of known as ABE, or account based engagement, sort of the next step notch up. I like to think about it a little differently. I like to think about it in terms of account based orchestration, which I use ABX within my team internally to describe that, and that's a huge initiative for us. And what that means is it's not just about sales and marketing. It's about sales, marketing, and product. Why does that matter? Well, because the portfolio and the strengths of your portfolio in terms of what differentiates you at a technology level, or from a customer experience perspective, has to be tightly aligned to how you market and how you sell. And those three things have to be in tight coordination, I think, in order to properly disrupt the market the way that I've been describing it, right? And so, yeah, it's things like content marketing and thought leadership that, whether that's your own that you've developed internally, or partnering with market influencers that are tracking the market, and really understand the dynamics that you believe to be true, and sort of reinforce that. So you've got third party validation. I think certainly from an advertising perspective, we're focused on enterprise. So, I think obviously email marketing, I believe, is still very, very valuable when you're talking about interacting and engaging with customers, as well as potentially white space accounts. I think LinkedIn advertising is certainly a good way to reach people that maybe you don't know, or in certain markets where maybe email marketing isn't as viable, where you have higher compliance, like in Germany as an example. Certainly using things like social platforms as a way to reach the right personas at the right types of accounts. And then I think it's about how do you then bring that together in terms of a more modernized operating rhythm between what your release schedule is from a product and roadmap perspective, to how you're marketing and promoting that portfolio, to targeting your messaging and that portfolio on the right accounts at the right time, and doing that in coordination with your sellers. And I think that those things coming together is really how you do it, and do it well.
Now, let's talk a little bit about coordinating with your sales team and sort of bringing marketing and sales teams together. You mentioned you have a background as a sales guy, right?
Don't tell anybody, Jackson. Don't tell anybody.
Well, and it's almost like it's like a trope, right? That like marketing and sales are always at loggerheads because what marketing is not delivering, leads that close, or because sales doesn't know how to close the leads we're giving them, or because marketing is promising the wrong thing, or whatever, right? You hear about these dysfunctional kind of sales marketing relationships that cause huge problems and really create a hard limit on the growth opportunity of companies. And I'm interested, as someone who has you know been a seller, as someone who has headed marketing teams, how do you create a harmonious relationship between these organizations that seem like they're often at odds?
It's interesting. I think part of that perception, which has been around for a very long time, as you've noted, and it is very typical. And I think a lot of times it's because there are a lot of marketers that focus, unfortunately, just on activity, and the hope is that the activity translates into pipeline. And so, I think one of the ways you break that down is you put them on the same team, right? When you think about sports and you think about team sports, Everybody has a role that they play, but it's around a shared objective, whether that's on an individual play or in a specific game, right? You have a game plan and you're executing against that game plan. I think you have to think about go to market the same way, right? Marketing has a role to play right alongside the sales team, right alongside the pre-sales engineering team, right alongside the business development reps that are cold calling in some cases, right? Whether that lives in sales or in marketing, which it can live in either these days. And so I think when you start talking about that, it's all about having shared objectives that you in a shared operating rhythm, as opposed to marketing doing their thing over here and sales is doing their thing over here. And the hope is that pipeline comes out of that somehow, some way. That just doesn't work in today's world, right? Especially, you again coming back to the COVID thing. I think leading up to COVID and coming out of COVID, you could be more of a reactionary salesperson or a reactionary go-to-market engine and do quite well. Those days are gone, right? Like the competing priorities that most enterprises are trying to manage through, and the dynamics in the economy mean that you actually have to be a lot smarter about how you market and how you sell. You actually have to be consultative and be in the kind of in the field, in the playing field alongside your customer to drive real outcomes. And so I think that type of coordination between these functional teams is really how you break down those barriers between sales and marketing. But at the end of the day, it comes down to kind of shared objectives, a shared operating rhythm, and then everybody sales. Everybody on my team has effectively the equivalent of a sales goal, right? It might not be a quota that's tied to revenue per se, but they have the equivalent of a quota related to other leading indicators that then help drive pipeline for our sellers. And that's the way you do it.
That makes sense. And how often are you getting them? We've had, I'll give you some examples. We had like one CMO who said that every time they produce a new asset for the sales team, she'll sit down and actually, field sales calls to try it out, right? We've had, I worked at an organization at one point where there were, marketers who had like, social selling titles that sat literally in the sales bullpen, right? And worked directly alongside sellers. Do you have any kind of tips on practically if you were going to be walking into any marketing organization, what you might do beyond goals, KPIs? That makes a ton of sense, aligning goals and KPIs, but what you might be doing in order to create the kind of interpersonal interactions that make the difference in how people view themselves.
Well, I think as a CMO, one of the first things that I like to do is I like to talk to customers. I like to talk to partners. I like to get out into the field with sellers and with sales leadership to just sort of get get a sense of the pulse of the market, the pulse of the organization. I think that really helps you very quickly gauge the current state. And then I think, to your point, as you start to light up new programs, like we're in the middle of doing this right now, right? A year ago we acquired a company of equal size that was very dominant in particular in Europe, and so together the combined company actually has the largest install base in unified communications. Right now, the Mitel organization historically was more of a mid-market business communications provider, versus the company that we acquired had more momentum in large enterprise. And so obviously bringing the two companies together, you have an enablement gap in terms of bringing your sellers up to a level playing field across the organization. And you also, the company we acquired had a very rich managed service business. So we wanted to upskill our sales reps to be able to go after those types of opportunities, right? And so one of the first things that I did is I worked with our product marketing organization to develop new content around more of a value selling approach, value framework approach to how you sell and do proper discovery to identify those types of opportunities with these very large organizations. Well, what's the best? What do you do when you're a sales leader? You do role plays. Well, why wouldn't we do that in marketing? Right. So the first thing that I did after we got this content, I had my head of product marketing go test pitch this off of target personas. And then I went and did it myself because I like to get my fingernails dirty, right? I went and did it on our own CIO just to understand where the gotchas were so that we could better enable our sellers to then take this into the field. And so I think that, it's maybe not what a lot of marketers think about, or maybe some of the people that are watching the show are thinking about in terms of, it's not always about the tools. Sometimes it's about getting down to the basics of just doing A/B testing, if you will, at more of a human level, right? Because that's what's going to give you the best insights and be able to optimize quickly as you iterate through this process to enable your sellers to do a better job.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. And I think, salespeople hate role playing. Everyone hates role playing, but I love the idea of actually implementing that practice because you know, uh, there are things we come up with sometimes in marketing that it's kind of easy for us to say if we don't actually have to go and deliver it. We don't actually have to use we don't have to eat our own dog food, as it were. And I think if you're getting in there and really using it, you see where things break down, or you see where people just don't get it. I have a client I've been working with. We've been developing some explainer videos for their product, and it's a really interesting product. Has a fantastic value proposition for their kind of target customer. But what we've had him go and do is actually take this video and take it around to his friends and show it to them and just say, do you get it? Like, do you understand what we're talking about here? And by just having it like shot down over and over and over again, we're getting this really, really polished explainer that you don't get if you just like make something that's pretty and makes sense to you internally, and then you kind of try and go to market with it. So I love what you're saying there. It makes a ton of sense.
Well, I mean, let's take a very marketing specific example. I'm sure many people watching the show and most marketers have done testing and around email nurture or email marketing, right? And what most of us have found, especially when you're doing B2B, is that the emails that look beautiful are the ones that perform typically the worst. And the ones that are, more net and more text based perform better. So I think it's an example of what you just described, where sometimes it's about, making sure the meat is there because that's what's going to drive an engagement, right? And I think the other thing is marketers that a lot of time you forget, you get too close to it and you try to get too clever, and you forget that at the end of the day, you're trying to solve a problem. You're trying to be consultative. You're trying to kind of connect the dots for somebody who, left to their own devices would just want a faster version of what they already have today, right? Because they don't know any better. And so I think when you start to test these things, you start to realize sometimes your cleverness is too vanilla and doesn't really align to the pain point that a given target customer might have. And so I think if you can tease that out, the best marketers are capable of teasing that out in a really succinct way. And it's also not all done at once. Getting back to kind of, are you using social? Are you using content? What are you doing? All of these things I think build on one another. They're breadcrumbs to tease out that pain that then allows you to deliver your value prop to somebody that then might say, yeah, that actually is me. That looks like me. And I need help with that. And it sounds like you guys have got an interesting approach. So I think that's, as marketers, that's the holy grail, is kind of taking people along that journey to really tease that out and then set the table for our sellers to then have those types of engagements that hopefully then solve those customers' problems and drive business value for them and for us.
One of the things I think you've kind of touched on here, and I just want to put a finer point on it, is assuming you've got a good product, right? And assuming there are people in the world for whom it solves a problem, and you're getting the product to the right people or in front of the right people, it shouldn't be a hard sell. They want their problem solved. And if you can convey clearly what it is you're doing, they're going to want to convert. I think that, though, your point is really well made about, like, we sometimes get too cute. Like the heavily designed email conveys, for example, at a certain level, like, disregard this. You get 10,000 pieces of spam every day. Any important email you get is a plain text email, right? They've seen that in, direct mail has seen the same thing. There's been this advent of really, really plain mail pieces for the same reason. So I'm interested to get your insights a little bit more on that, and a little bit more on how to kind of have that no nonsense communication of value in marketing. When as creative people, we often want to kind of go above and beyond to make something beautiful and flashy.
Yeah. Well, again, I think it comes back to, more you interface with, your target audience, right? As marketers, you always, and sellers for that matter, and as product people, all three of the disciplines that I've spent time doing, right? It starts with your user. It starts with the audience. It starts with, kind of who that is and how they talk and what language do they use and how do they think about the problems they're trying to solve. And I'll give you a really specific example. A couple of years ago, a company that I work for decided we were going to move from purely being focused on horizontal solutions to putting our toe in the water around some more specialized vertical solutions. And so we did a ton of research that I led around working with companies like IDC and not talking to the analysts that covered our specific category as a solution provider, but actually targeting those analysts that covered the space of some target markets like manufacturing, as an example, like healthcare, as an example, and starting to learn what language do they use? How do they frame the problems they're trying to solve? What are the biggest challenges that they're trying to solve? Right. And then how did that align? As we looked at these different markets that we thought were interesting based on our history and where we'd had success in some of these markets in the past, as we started to understand that, we started to then figure out, okay, market manufacturing is going to be the one that we're going to focus on. And so then what we did is we actually then tailored everything from the language and the way we talked about the problems to be solved to identifying and teasing out what those problems were and having really rich content that kind of supported that more from a third party perspective. And then we trained our sales teams to talk in that language and to frame things in such a way as they were doing their kind of their prospecting qualification to go down this path. The results were unbelievable in less than 6 months, right? We were also trying to create space. So we focused on phase one is just tweaking what we had on the shelf from a product perspective into bundles that made sense for that industry based on what we'd seen historically, as a stepping stone to then actually producing some differentiated features. But we needed to create that space to get product and engineering time to go build that stuff. So just by changing the bundling and the way that we brought some product and services to market, talking about it in their language, framing it based on the problems that they were trying to solve and what the negative consequences of those problems were and what the benefit would be with us. We watched our pipeline go from manufacturing represented maybe 10% of our pipeline on a quarterly basis to in less than 6 months, it jacked up to 25% of our pipeline was in manufacturing just by making those changes. So I think this idea of really focusing on the customer pain and ideally it being time-based pain, this idea of kind of really surrounding those customers in terms of how you talk about it and that coordination between sales, marketing, and product. Those are the things that I think really can help a given organization as they're trying to enter a market or disrupt a market really have a bigger impact, if that makes sense.
That's a fantastic point. Yeah, I think you see that a lot with, a marketer exists within a particular industry and they get very myopic in the language they're using, where they're saying we're talking as if we're just talking to people within our industry. And the problem is a lot of your customers aren't in your industry. A lot of your customers aren't spending every day using the type of language you're using. And so getting in there and figuring out how is it that my customer talks about this. And that might be, if you're in a B2B space, you're servicing a lot of different industries, there might be very specialized language around these different kind of, small micro markets that you have to figure out and learn and then figure out how to target it correctly. I think that's really smart.
Yeah, I got actually one funny story along those lines. I was just in the UK a few weeks ago, and I was talking to one of our sales engineering leaders, who's a good friend of mine. He's actually Scottish, but he came down to London to spend some time with me, and we were talking about this very thing. And earlier in his career, so this is probably 10, 20 years ago, he was doing this big pitch to this set of doctors and health practitioners, right? And he kept talking about ROI this and ROI this, and finally the target audience, sitting there in the room with him, just started laughing at him. And so, being Scottish, he stops them and he says, "Okay, guys, what's going on? What is so funny?" And they said, "Well, ROI means something very different to us than it does to you because it has to do with blood tests." So again, knowing your audience and using their vocabulary, I think, is a pretty important thing.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. A lot of the terminology we're using, folks may not follow. And I think that there's like an economy of language that draws us to jargon, right? We want to use jargon because it feels like it's an efficient way to sort of compress information. But I think oftentimes if we ask like, hey, if I had to explain this to like a fifth grader, how would I say it? Um, and that's not to say that your audience, isn't very bright and can't keep up and can't understand jargon, but our customers are busy And if you're having to sort of not just get their attention to begin with, but then take a lot of their brain power to understand what you're saying, you're going to lose them. And if you're able to sort of strip out the jargon and say things simply, I think makes a huge difference.
From a sales perspective, there's a cliche out there that I live by, which is you get delegated to who you sound like. So if you're trying to get an audience with a CIO and you sound like somebody who's talking to a telecom manager in my industry, guess what? You're going to lose your audience with the CIO and you're going to get delegated 2 layers below them, right? Or more. And so again, I think understanding the persona, the audience that you're in, what their problems are that they're trying to solve at the altitude with which they're operating, I think is half the battle in many cases, right?
That's brilliant. You get delegated to who you sound like. I really like that. That's a good.
Yeah. I can't take credit for it. I picked that up somewhere along the way.
Right on. Now, Eric, you have not always been a marketer. You outlined for us at the beginning of the conversation, you kind of think of yourself as really a business leader who has found his way into marketing. Tell us a little bit about how did you end up as a chief marketing officer, and did you ever think this is where you'd be?
It's not where I thought I would be, and it's my journey's an eclectic one, but I think it makes me sort of a different CMO compared to my peers. And so when I started my career, actually, it was during the digital transformation that was happening in the entertainment space. And so everything was moving digital from analog, whether it was in the video editing and production space or whether it was in the film industry. I was right in the middle of all of that, and I was a pretty technical salesperson. So very successful selling to the likes of Pixar, to some of George Lucas's companies, to Sony. Some really great logos, Electronic Arts, that I had the opportunity to work with, and still friends with a lot of my former champions when I was a seller, actually. Some of the best visual effects supervisors in the industry, even still today. And so there was a really great period of time. But what it taught me, both being a technical seller and the type of audience that I was dealing with, that I tended to be very involved with product and sort of that intersection of product fit with what you were selling, because that was the nature of kind of disrupting that industry at the time. And so out of that, first I actually was an entrepreneur and started my own visual effects company for a period of time. So as a CEO, which meant you had to sell, you had to market, and you were also sort of a product person. And so that was a really, really fun period of my career. And then when I sold my company, I came back to tech. And my first opportunity was to lead, actually build from scratch, a product marketing organization. And the CEO is somebody I'd worked for before, who basically said, I need somebody that speaks product and speaks sales. And so obviously, given my background, that was a natural fit for me. And so that's really how I broke into marketing. And then it just sort of built from there, right? I think in terms of windows of market opportunity, based on being an entrepreneur and being an enterprise seller early in my career, right? And that naturally then, some of the partnerships that I developed when I was building up a series of award-winning product marketing organizations was all about that alignment between product and marketing, and also marketing and sales from a demand gen perspective, and how those three things came together. So it's not really surprising, my passion for what I call ABX, the trifecta of product, sales, and marketing. It's not that surprising given that background that I've sort of arrived at where I've arrived. I think it's really important in terms of how you promote your portfolio, how you think about differentiation, whether that's product-led differentiation, whether it's customer experience-led differentiation, or even kind of operational efficiency-led, in terms of being an enabler for organizations to drive operational efficiency. Those types of differentiators. I think when you have that kind of background, you start to realize, okay, what's your angle as a company in terms of addressing customer need, and who is that customer? All of those worlds and disciplines kind of come together. And so that's how I found my way into being a CMO.
Wow. And how do you find, you're now managing marketers, career marketers, people who don't have the same background as you, people who have a very probably different set of like interests and proclivities that have brought them into their career. How do you communicate across these teams that are potentially very different from you?
Well, it's interesting. As a business leader, I'm a big sports. I love sports, different types of sport, all sports, right? Especially team sports. And part of the reason I love it is because of the team dynamic. right? I love that. And it used to be one of my interview questions when I would interview somebody is, tell me about a team sport that you played, because I think it's a good proxy for how you collaborate and learn and grow. And so I used to love asking that. I still ask that question a lot of times today. I subscribe. I'm a big Golden State Warriors fan on the basketball side. I love Steve Kerr. I think he's an amazing coach. And so I subscribe to sort of his core principles from a leadership perspective around it starts with joy. We have to love what we do. You have to be mindful and in the moment. Can't be distracted. You got to be able to focus and execute. It's about compassion and being an empathetic leader, understanding what makes your team tick. And I think that gets to what you're asking about. How do you bring marketers along in terms of helping them grow? And I think that starts with that idea of being an empathetic leader and being inclusive and being a good listener, right? Understanding what their career goals are, understanding and helping them understand where their gaps might be in terms of achieving those goals. And every time I've done that in my career, I've been able to help them grow as well as kind of get on board with this idea of how sales, marketing, and product can work together to drive better outcomes for a given organization. Because at the end of the day, Steve Kerr's fourth principle is about we're here to compete, right? This is not a nonprofit endeavor. We're here to compete in a market. We're here to drive business impact for our customers and to grow our business. And so I think those things play really well in terms of helping people on that journey.
And how do you, this might be a really straightforward question, but I think it's something that marketing leaders have to, all leaders, business leaders, leaders in and out of business really have to think about is how do you go about discovering what it is that motivates a given person? I imagine you get some people who come through the door and they're like, I want to feed my creative flame. And some people are like, I want to make a bunch of money. And some people are like, I want a flexible role that gives me the opportunity to be home, and put my kids in bed at, 7 p.m. every night. And I can put work away. How do you discover what that is for each person? And then how do you paint a vision for them of how to align what they're doing each day at work with what it is they're trying to achieve?
It's one of my favorite parts of my job, right? I coach sports, in my life when my kids were young, and actually when I was in college, I coached sports. So I think it's very similar. It's like, how do you take a group of people and make them work together, number one, as a team and be the best versions of themselves, right? And it starts with having conversations, engaging with them, asking questions, understanding what makes them tick, right? And I'll give you a very specific example. There's somebody that worked for me in my past that was convinced she wanted to be a CMO. And, not all in one conversation, but over time, in having conversations with her, I started to realize she couldn't stand demand gen. She couldn't stand the metrics part of being a CMO. She loved brand. She loved sort of differentiation. She loved storytelling. And so I finally said to her, I said, are you sure you want to be a CMO? Like, is it because of the money? Is it because of the prestige of the title? Like, I don't understand. And the more we talked about it, the more she realized, right? Like, she could do what she loved doing at a really high level and be elite and make the same kind of money that a CMO would make if she could get to that level, which she is capable of and has done. And she decided, you know what, you're right. I don't want to be a CMO. I wanted it for the wrong reasons, right? Now, she may still end up being a CMO, right? That could still happen for her. And there's certainly ways to address that. But I think the point is, it's about engaging. It's about having conversations. It's about, number one, understanding where somebody wants to go, where they think they want to go, and then helping them sort of plot out a journey for themselves from a career development perspective. I'm pretty passionate about goal setting. I talked about, everybody on my team has the equivalent of a quota. I usually have, kind of 4 to 5 goals that I ask people to take on. 2 goals are the same for everybody on my team. One has to do with demand gen. One has to do with building reputation and brand, and they're metrics driven. Everything's a SMART goal. Then there's, 1 or 2 goals that are tied to somebody's functional responsibilities that should accrue to those other goals. And then I mandate that everybody has to have something that's going to help them further their career. Because and it's not just about taking a class or a certification. I want to force a conversation that helps people start to understand where they want to go. Because if I understand that, and if my leadership team understands that, then as special projects come up, you can assign those people to fill the gaps where maybe they lack experience and they can test the waters. And I think it's that combination of things that has really helped me propel a number of people's careers, which is super rewarding.
I also think that goes a long way towards keeping people from, you get folks, and I don't think this is inherent to anybody's personality. I think it's just a pattern that emerges. Folks who show up and they're there to, kind of watch the clock and punch their card and say, I did my time and I can collect my check. And people fall into that because they don't see how what they're doing every day plays into their goals. They don't see how, this job they have right now is going to help them get where they want to go. And people fall into a pattern of being like sort of, passive, non-participants in their own career. And that ends up negatively impacting and dragging down a team. So I love what you're saying there, because I think it goes a long way towards getting people to show up and give their all because they understand how it pays off for them. And I love the example you gave about the person who thought she wanted to be a CMO and learned that wasn't really what she wanted, because you have the advantage of being a few steps further along the path. And you can say, I don't think what's at the end of this path is what you think is at the end of this path. And let's help you figure out the right path. And there's nothing wrong with making that pivot. Let's just make sure you understand that you actually are going where you want to go. I love that.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. And I think there's one other thing. I think we, especially in high tech, we get super caught up in sort of the ambition. I do this today, and I need to do this tomorrow, and I'm supposed to be on some sort of schedule of what my career is supposed to look like. And I think, especially post COVID, one of the things that I've noticed in terms of the teams that I've had the good fortune to lead is that there's some people that just love their craft, right? And they're making a conscious decision of, I'm going to be really good at what I do, but please don't promote me, because I really like the balance I have at home. My kids are young. I want to be able to coach. I want to be able to do this. I want to be an individual contributor. I don't want to lead people. I'm happy to be a team lead, but not a manager. I think there's more of a recognition of that balance in certain individuals coming out of COVID of what really matters to them in their personal lives. And that's obviously a very personal choice. So I think, again, as a modern leader, I think you have to tease that out. Not everybody's comfortable having those types of conversations. And so I think it's our job as leaders to try and tease that out and have those types of open dialogue. Because to your point, if you don't, and you don't understand kind of what the expectations are and what each other is doing as a team, then you can't really gel as a team, right? And I like to say, when you gel as a team, like all of a sudden, it's a little cliche, but all of a sudden those things that felt impossible are pretty possible, right? When you gel as a team, right? When you don't, and you're siloed, and everything is hard. And so I think the better you can break that down and you can get people into that groove of how they work together and what their expectations are with their careers and what they're trying to do, the more you can level set across your team that way, I think the better off you are and the more momentum you can create.
Yeah, that's excellent. I love that. And I love the point that you don't want to set up an environment where there's a feeling that it's kind of up or out, or a feeling that basically if you're not a team manager or on track to become a team manager, then you're somehow less than. Because I've certainly seen people in my career who, to your point, they don't want to lead a big team. It doesn't mean they don't want elevation. It doesn't mean they don't want career growth. It's just that their path is not to lead the biggest possible headcount. Their path is to really become fantastic at what they do, and well regarded as an expert in what they do. And I think that's a fantastic point. Eric, how would you feel about a lightning round?
I'm game. Let's go for it.
All right. What is the most important trait a CMO needs to have?
Storytelling.
What career advice do you have for an aspiring CMO?
Oh, that's a good one. Try selling something.
If you could market any brand other than Mitel, what would it be?
Probably design software.
Any particular brand in mind?
No, but I like the creative process. I'm still very passionate about kind of the improving the efficiency and the iteration process for creative software. So I think there's still a lot of opportunity there. Someday maybe I'll go do that.
What's your favorite marketing book?
Well, it's not a marketing book, actually. It's more of a sales book, but I carry it around with me, and actually have suggested a number of my team members read it. It's The Qualified Sales Leader by John McMahon, it's a great book. It's all about inspection and coaching and driving. Very. It's about operationalizing pipeline, and I think it's a great book.
I'm going to check it out. Where outside of marketing do you look for inspiration?
Well, we talked earlier on before we started the program here about Utah and our shared love of Utah. I'm a huge fan of the national park system here in the United States, and my wife and my children and I, even though my kids are grown, we still do a lot of road trips to go visit places like Arches and Canyonlands, and Utah's a particular favorite of ours, but we also love Glacier and a lot of other places like Yosemite.
Do you have a favorite national park? You can only name one.
Probably Zion or Yosemite or Tide. My wife would say Glacier. She really likes Glacier.
For anyone planning the Utah road trip, Angel's Landing in Zion National Park it's amazing, really beautiful.
Well, and the other thing I would say about Utah, which is a lot of people don't think about until they start planning a trip, is that Arches and Canyonlands are within 30 minutes of one another. So if you go to Moab, which is a really cool place as well, you can hit both. And getting back to inspiration outside, creating space. I do believe that you have to create space for yourself to be creative, and I don't just mean like pretty pixels on a page. I actually mean creative thought, creative problem solving. If you don't create space for yourself, you'll never be able to break free of the monotony of the day. And so going to national parks, doing those types of things outside are, sort of where I find my inspiration and my best creative thinking.
So, load up your favorite podcast, load up Top CMO and go for a hike, guys. That's what we're saying. So solve all your marketing problems. What's your favorite marketing campaign of all time?
So I did a marketing campaign pretty early in my career, before Zoom had their Rooms product. The company that I was working for was coming out with a competitive product. Zoom was barely on the scene yet, still pretty young as a company. And so it's both my favorite campaign, but also, was problematic because we couldn't get the product to market as a company fast enough. Ultimately, we were too small. But the campaign itself, I did a lot of market research, and it was really great. Probably the highest performing email marketing campaign I've ever done, targeting CIOs with a cost-effective room solution that was an alternative to expensive hardware-based systems back in the day. And I still look back at that program and that campaign very fondly because we built a lot of momentum and a lot of demand around it. It was cool.
Right on. Is there anything we didn't discuss that we should have?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think, really enjoyed the conversation with you and certainly the style of conversation. I think, I think as CMOs or marketing leaders, I think it's so important to balance, as I've said, that intersection between product, between sales, between marketing, and to pick your line using a skiing, kind of phrase, pick your line. Right? You're standing at the top of a hill looking down the field of moguls. You got to pick your line. And I think you got to figure out what your strengths are based on where the uncommunicated opportunities are relative to your target customers. And the trick is if you can align those things between that trifecta of product, sales, and marketing, you've got a winner. And I think that's the secret.
Right on. Eric Hanson, thank you so much for joining us on Top CMO.
All right, great. Thanks, Jackson.
This was brought to you by Top Thought Leader. Find out more at topthoughtleader.com.